The protective dome over the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, which is designed to prevent radioactive material from escaping from the 1986 disaster reactor, has not been fully functional since a drone attack in February, according to the International Atomic Energy Agency. Should Ukraine be worried? Should we be worried? Wasn't there fighting in Chernobyl back in 2022 when the Russian invasion of Ukraine commenced? Let's discuss. When Russia attacked Ukraine in 2022, its forces captured the area. This was not the first time there was fighting for Chernobyl. Long before there even was a nuclear power plant, Polish and Soviet forces clashed in the area during the Polish-Soviet War. In 1920, the Polish 9th Infantry Division under General Władysław Sikorski launched an operation in the Polesia swamps to capture Chornobyl, an important river port and base of the Soviet Dnieper flotilla. On the 25th of April 1919, Jaworski's force advanced towards Chernobyl while the flotilla sailed on the Pripyat. After repelling an attack by Soviet boats, the Polish force split into two columns to attack the town from the north and the west on the 27th of April. Chornobyl was defended by the Soviet 61st Rifle Brigade and 12 armed boats. On the 27th of April, the western Polish column began its assault early in the morning. Jaworski's northern group arrived slightly late after fighting Soviet units en route, but with the help of the Polish Pinsk flotilla, they broke through. Polish infantry and artillery captured the western outskirts, and Jaworski's arrival tipped the balance. Soviet forces were routed. Their flotilla retreated to the Pripyat estuary, and Polish boats entered the port as Chornobyl fell. Despite the Polish victory, the area fell under Soviet control eventually. From 1921 onwards, it was officially incorporated into the Ukrainian SSR, part of the Soviet Union. On the 15th of August, 1972, the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant began construction about 15 kilometers northwest of the town Chernobyl. The plant was built alongside Pripyat, a so-called Atomograd city, founded on the 4th of February 1970, that was intended to house the employees of the nuclear power plant. It is April 26, 1986. A human error caused something to go wrong in the fourth nuclear reactor of Chernobyl. Heat production increased to such an extent that the plant exploded and caught fire. The explosion killed 31 people, most of whom died a few days later from radiation sickness. However, the fire sucked most of the radiation released high into the air, so the number of direct victims in Chernobyl itself was not as high as it could have been. After the remains of the nuclear power plant were cleared away, the other three plants resumed operation. Until that moment, the events of the Soviet Union had not received much publicity elsewhere in the world. That changed when higher radioactivity levels were measured in Sweden a day later. However, the Swedes thought it was due to their own nuclear power plant and put an emergency plan into effect. Rumors then began to circulate in Sweden about problems at a Russian nuclear power plant, but the Soviet authorities remained silent. Because no one realized that the worst nuclear disaster in history had occurred in Chernobyl, virtually nothing was done, not even the next day, 2 days after the disaster. 3 days after the disaster, on April 29, 1986, Soviet state television finally reported on the disaster and more than 100,000 local residents were evacuated. Opinions differ on the exact consequences of the disaster. According to a 2006 report by the World Health Organization, 4,175 of the 600,000 people who received the highest doses of radiation would die. Of the 6.8 million people who received slightly lower doses, 5,160 would die. After the disaster, the infamous Reactor 4 was covered with a concrete shell. The area surrounding the reactor was still closed off. All residents have been evacuated to the newly built town of Slavutish, about 15 kilometers from the exclusion zone. Because the area itself isn't touched, many different flowers and trees now grow there, turning the disaster site into a nature reserve. The site used to be open to tourists also because the radiation level was no longer considered dangerous. During my 2018 visit to Ukraine, I also visited the Chernobyl area and the abandoned town of Pripyat. It was one of the most fascinating trips I have ever made. Especially the deserted town made a huge impression on me. They had to abandon the town overnight, and decades later, nature seemed to have reclaimed the area. I also witnessed the sarcophagus. On the 24th of February 2022, Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Chernobyl's staff were placed on high alert and prevented from leaving. Around 300 were in the exclusion zone at the time. By early afternoon, Russian troops advanced from Belarus and reached the Chernobyl plant, where Ukrainian National Guard forces lacking heavy weapons were surrounded and forced to surrender. By the end of the day, Russia had captured Chernobyl and Pripyat. Ukrainian staff were held on the site throughout the occupation, working without shift changes and under close Russian surveillance. Reports emerged that they were effectively being held hostage. While the IAEA confirmed the site had not been physically damaged, it expressed concern about safety conditions, loss of communications, and the extreme strain on the personnel. On the 9th of March, power to the plant was cut, raising fears about cooling and radiation risks. Although the IAEA assessed that immediate danger was limited, some staff were finally allowed to rotate out on the 20th of March. Russian forces also used the highly contaminated red forest for troop movements, kicking up radioactive dust. Several soldiers were reportedly exposed to dangerous radiation levels. On the 29th of March, Russia announced its withdrawal from the Kyiv region, and by the 1st of April, all Russian forces had left Chernobyl. Ukrainian staff raised their flag again, and the IAEA prepared a support mission. After re-entering the zone, Ukraine reported extensive damage and looting, with an estimated 135 million in equipment destroyed. An inspection a couple of weeks ago revealed that the steel roof had been damaged by the impact of a Russian drone, causing deterioration in its quality. The IAEA carried out the inspection at the same time as a nationwide investigation into damage to power plants since the war between Ukraine and Russia. According to IAEA Director Grossi, repairs have now been carried out, but a full restoration is necessary to prevent further deterioration and ensure long-term nuclear safety.